So what is an example of responsible sourcing? The primary area where we've seen activity is in conflict minerals. What are conflict minerals? Conflict minerals refer specifically to four metals: tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold. These were originally identified as concern in the United States in 2008. The focus has been on Central Africa, specifically in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, which has a history of civil war, has a history of militia taking control and profits from the mining in those areas, and associated human rights violations. And here it is those artisanal and small-scale mining operations where there's manual work, harsh working conditions in remote areas that are particularly vulnerable to conflict and human rights problems. Curiously, these conflict minerals correspond quite strongly to our definitions of critical materials. Gold, tin, but particularly tantalum and tungsten are categorized as critical raw materials. The regulations around conflict minerals have evolved. We call these regulations on the 3TG. In the United States, since about 2012, we've had requirements for publicly listed companies to report on the 3TG origins that go into their products, with a focus on the DRC or the adjoining countries, and the necessity to demonstrate due diligence in the sourcing of those materials. In Europe, 10 years later, since 2021, importers have been required to exercise due diligence when reporting on their 3TGs. The reference document for those regulations and much of the industry efforts have been from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. The due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected areas is this reference. This is used by companies and associations and governments both in the West and in places like China as the main framework. This document describes the idea of a chain of custody that supports traceability of the material and identification of the actors in the supply chain. Due diligence is described as a 5-step approach: policy and management, identification of risks, mitigation of risks, auditing, and reporting. Since its implementation, the OECD guidance has been extended to include other areas beyond Central Africa, to look at other risks beyond conflict, to look, for example, at human rights and governance risks, which include things like bribery and fraud, and to consider opportunities for analyzing other materials, specifically mica, gemstones, and the battery materials have started to receive attention. So we have systems and standards and auditing and certification approaches operating now since about 2010. I'm looking here at 3 different levels. You have in-region programs, for example, in the DRC, where, for example, mining locations bag and put tags on their product as it goes out of country. The Responsible Minerals Initiative is an important area where smelters and refiners who are buying materials and minerals from miners need to go through their own standards and auditing programs. And at the end of the supply chain, you have manufacturer programs implemented by end user companies in electronics, aerospace, and automotive who are also doing due diligence in their supply chain purchases. The conflict minerals efforts have been largely successful. Today, the majority of 3T production is conformant to responsible sourcing standards. The Responsible Minerals Initiative identified about 400 smelters and refiners around the world and have high levels of participation from tantalum, tin, and tungsten. Gold has been less successful, And unfortunately, activities like smuggling and bribery continue in Central Africa and out of the DRC. The success of all these programs with respect to in-region problems is still being examined, and we do still have problems of conflict and human rights violations in those parts of the world.